Nourbese, I'm excited to welcome you to She Can today. Nourbese Flint, you're the president of All Above All, a catalyst for abortion justice and to build the political power of voters of color. Previously, you were the senior director of Black engagement at Planned Parenthood. You're a founding member of Trust Black Women, a national coalition dedicated to increasing respect and support of Black women, and are a founding member of the Black Women's Democratic Club. Nourbese, tell us a bit more about those pivotal points that got you to where you are today.
Hey, um, what are the pivotal points that got me here today? I feel like I started my journey and I started my journey actually not wanting to work in nonprofit. And I say that because my mother worked in nonprofit and is um, I would say an OG, but maybe she wouldn't want me to say that. Vintage, an elder-ish person in the reproductive justice movement, and had dedicated her life to the work. And I was just like, I'm going to be the person to make money. Like I'm actually am going to go out there and do something, and I'm going to go into journalism, which I don't know why I was delusional and thinking that that's where the money was. Um, but I always was fascinated with telling stories. But what led me into the RJ work while I was going to school, while I was, just around and about, I sat at my mother's knees and went to the meetings with her around reproductive justice. And so it was always kind of ingrained to me, this kind of idea around autonomy, um, this framework around that was made by and for Black women that is the idea of not only we need to fight for the right to have children or not to have children, we need to fight for the right to have children. And also the part about raising families with dignity and respect and being able, what is that? Being able to think about what that means, right? So
Mm.
it's not just a conversation of of like your reproductive systems, but it's a conversation about economic class, gender, and all those things intersect with how in which you can raise your family. And so I wouldn't say there was like a moment in time that was a jumping off point of how I got into the field, but almost like I was born into it, kind of fought it a little bit, and then like came home because this is where um this is this is what makes me feel the most alive and like I feel like it is my value add to the world.
Nourbese, so tell us more about your work at All Above All.
Yeah, so all above all, it's interesting. Our origin story is about 12 years ago, and we came together to around a campaign around the Hyde Amendment. And for those folks who are not familiar, the Hyde Amendment is this archaic classic classes law, our appropriations, that essentially says that there's no federal funding for abortions,
Mm.
right? And what that means in reality is that if you're on Medicaid, if you work for the military, if you work for the federal government, if you have any type of federal insurance, you have to come out of pocket for abortion access. And we know that very often it is harming families that are working at the margins and working to make ends meet, who have to figure out how to come out of pocket for access that they should have, right? And so at the time when we had that and we when we came together and when it was created, like that was like the third rail in abortion access. It was like, well, we shouldn't actually we shouldn't fund abortions with federal dollars. And it actually shouldn't be something that we should think about in our assurance pieces. And we all started because it wanted to push against that conversation about like, why not? And who is it harming? And so We pulled reproductive justice organizations, both state and national, organizations that were primarily led by folks of color, that primarily led by women, into a coalition for us to build power. Fast forward, we were one of the first organizations to introduce this landmark bill, the EACH Act, brought to us by Barbara Lee, who is now the mayor of Oakland. But it was a landmark piece of legislation that we put together to really, again, pull those federal restrictions away, and for us to have abortion access that is available, affordable, and accessible for all who need. Um, so that is our origin story, up into about Dobbs, where we looked at the field and we built a lot of power. We changed and shifted the conversation, and now we are looking at a very different world with Roe being gone.
Yeah.
And we realized that in order for us to fulfill our mission around making abortion access affordable, available, and accessible, that we also had to look at pieces like democracy, lean harder into economic, racial, and gender justice for us to achieve the 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 autonomy that we need because the world had shifted and the world has shifted in a way that showed us that you cannot not play in democracy work. You cannot not play in the economic space because these things intersect in people's lives. And so the work that we do now is really working at the state and federal level on policy, both on abortion and reproductive health, as well as looking at democracy work. And then we work very much so in narrative shifts and imagineering. And so our narrative shift work is thinking about how we shift culture around these pieces. How do we build power through culture? And imagineering is our innovative work where we are trying to use different ways in which um, like culture, bringing culture and policy and organizing into a way to build power with people and organizations.
Nourbese, you do very, very important work, especially in this day and time. And it's really interesting how you shifted to the landscape that we now have post Roe v. Wade, right? I think, why don't you explain to us a little bit more the status quo of right now? What is going on in the US right now? We all know that reproductive rights are being taken away from women. And that doesn't only harm women, it harms families. Um, and so it's really in the interest of everybody to do more work in this chapter. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the work you're doing, the levels of fundraising that are needed, why that is needed, etc. So we get a bit of a picture of the landscape and the impact of the work you're doing.
Yeah. So in terms of like the first question about like where is repro access? It's in a bad place. We're in a bad place right now in the US. Um, any given day, it's somewhere between 18 and 20 states that have banned abortion pretty radically.
Yeah.
And the why I say any given day between 18 and 20 because there's still court cases moving.
Mm.
Um, and so as they like go and ascend to different courts, that changes the states. But what we know that is that people are having to travel farther and spend more money in order to get abortion access that they need. We know that women are dying for not getting the access that they need. We know that folks' as bodies, particularly women and birthing people's bodies, are taking away, are being used as vessels, and their autonomy is being taken away, like we saw in Georgia. So abortion access is really depending on where you live and your zip code and your access to insurance,
Mm.
um, and your access to money. And so if you live in the wrong state, or you have the wrong insurance, or you don't have the an insane amount of spendable cash, that dictates whether you are able to fully have autonomy over your life,
Yeah,
and the decisions of growing your family or not.
yeah.
Um,
Nourbese, so what is the change that we need to see?
yeah, so I was like, how do we back into, there's so many things, but the first piece I think is that we need a government that works for us. Um, and that's just full stop, period. Um, what we've seen in history, when we look at authoritarian or fascism regimes, the like first thing that they go after is abortion access and the autonomy of women, right? They commodify our bodies. And that is exactly what is happening here. And so that the conversation about democracy and abortion access or democracy and repro access, those are intertwined, very much so. And so making sure that we are having conversations about voting, that we are fighting to make sure that we have free and fair elections, that we are reforming the court and having a voice in that conversation is incredibly important. We also need to make sure that we have champion legislators, both at the federal and state level. And that means that we need to call them and say, hey, what are you doing on abortion access? What are you doing for reproductive health care? What are you doing on Medicaid? And keep pushing those conversations because particularly there are some parts, even in our side of the world, um, that are like, well, we don't need to care about reproductive health anymore. That was just the election issue. But we don't need to care about that now. And we have to keep our foot on folks' neck about like, this is an important issue, and we need you to have an, not only an idea of where we're going, but you need to be still pushing and moving the needle on what it means to have full autonomy over people's life. And that includes abortion access, and that includes also maternal health and pregnancy as well, because those things are also interlinked all the way through. And so I tell folks all the time that this is a conversation that is not going to be one in DC. This is going to be one in the neighborhoods of communities across America. And those conversations that we need everyday people to be holding people accountable, particularly their elected officials accountable, and pushing the conversation both around reproductive health and democracy.
Yeah. Norbese, you said so many important things, and I think when you were explaining it, it came out so clearly that all of this is linked, right? These kind of leaders, or not leaders, but these kind of in this case, the president of the United States of America and his party, they're taking women's agency away. And why is that linked to women? Why is that linked to voting? How that is linked to all the different areas that you are involved in? And why it's so important to bring it back to the local, because this is where every one of us can have an impact, and this is where each one of you can hold some agency and express the power you have as voters of America. Nourbese, what do you feel, um, what levels of fundings is needed, and what happens if that's not achieved?
Yeah, so I always daydream of wishing that progressive folks had the same type of dollars that our opposition have.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is that they have money, but they also have money to be innovative and experiment with in ways that we don't. And so, and we have very often on our side is like, we need a very data-stricken and very kind of realistic, we're only looking 2 years in front of us type of funding. And so organizations are constantly having to like be in this perpetual fundraising, perpetual kind of evaluation of pieces that really like dampens experimentation,
Mm.
innovation, and creativity that is needed for what we need for the future we're trying to move to. And so I wish that we had the type of like pot of pieces of saying, hey, we don't know where this is going to land, but we know we need to do something different in order to get us to the place that we need to go. And so let's try stuff funding, right? We need funding for infrastructure and pieces. I was a part of a project that was looking at particularly Black reproductive justice organizations, and they are some of the lowest funded organizations comparative to other reproductive justice organizations, but also reproductive health and rights organizations, but are told and asked to do the same amount of work, if not more, to hold both direct action and direct services where we're working directly with community, and then also federal and state pieces as well. And so there's just a lot put on smaller organizations that keeps them in cycles where they can't really expand, build the capacity that they need because they're getting like a, a a tenth of the amount of money that is needed to do the type of work, which comes at the disadvantage of then people having to work themselves to their sick, right? And so when I look at and think about fundraising and I think about the type of funding our movement needs, we need innovation money, we need infrastructure money, and that needs to be like multi-year type of funds. And we also need funds that are not directed to foundations, but me like from folks and people and other like corporate entities or other places or different ways and we can think about funding for organizations don't have to be tied so merely to foundations. So I don't know, I said a lot to answer that question, but yeah, it's a quagmire of pieces, but really innovation and infrastructure funding is like just desperately needed in our movement.
Norbese, what vision do you have? We all know that women get a lot less money. Black women get even a lot less money than white women do. How what do you see is something where you feel that there is a there's something or someone that can change that, as in you're part of the Trust Black Women organization, the Black Women's Democratic Club. What change do you see on the ground that could change this narrative?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is it's not much of a change in the sense of like a policy change. It's a change of just trusting people and
Yeah.
trusting women, trusting Black women. But I just fantasize again about this world in which that women don't have to prove their points, improve their what, prove their worth, and
Yeah.
prove their ideas in ways that we don't see men have to do, um, and also have to work as hard to get into the door, right? And so yeah, we need trust. We need folks to open doors. And I feel very much when I think of the reproductive justice movement and how like so many people use that framework across the globe of like reproductive justice, which is an intersectional space, or international intersectional framework that was based on human rights. Um, but it's not given credit to the Black women that started that piece, right? There's 12
Mm,
Black women who started it. The funding for organizations that do reproductive justice work or shifted to reproductive justice work over the years um, far outpaced the funding to those that was given to those kind of starting organizations. And that has to do a lot to me with like trust um, and and believing and also integrity in how we both fund and think about the work.
yeah. Nourbese, I'm wondering, as you're talking, who are your allies at the moment? Who are the people who are willing to listen, to learn, to be a part of it, to support this mission, to be on board for women's? It's a basic human right. It should be a basic human right.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, we do have tons of allies, right? And in the sense that we have a network of partners that we work with at the state and federal level, reproductive justice organizations across the nation, some reproductive rights and health organizations, as well as folks in the democracy space, environmental space, and the economic justice space. We do have a couple of just also brilliant funders who are like, we're going to try and lift this up as much as we can.
Yeah.
Um, and some elected officials, right? Ayanna Pressley, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley is a superstar and has been carrying reproductive health and rights on her back, not only for us in the DC world, but for like the rest of the country. And so we have folks who are doing the Lord's work in building the peace of building and being allies with Repro. I think where we still need the conversations are is when people are like thinking about their childcare or childcare conversations or economic justice conversations, and if repro folks are not at the table, I really would love for those folks to invite and be thinking about, well, what does this mean for repro? As we need to invite ourselves into and how we ask ourselves questions about how economic justice and childcare policy and all these other pieces impact people's reproductive and sexual health.
Yeah, they're all interwoven. Yeah, absolutely. Nourbese, so I wonder what can each one of us do, or what can each one of the very many Americans do to partake and support your?
Yeah, so I love this question. There are several things that folks can do, both in the country and out. So for folks in America, I would say very much so that keeping elected officials accountable is incredibly important. So that means that calls, the texts, the emails, the signing is incredibly important, but also organizing folks and their in your homes, right? We have a reproductive justice toolkit that's completely free about how to organize a meeting at home. One of the things that is like deeply important and how we all get free is that building and rebuilding community. And that happens again, block by block of building community. And so we need folks to go out there and build community. You are the best messenger, particularly in a place of disinformation and misinformation. You are the best messenger for your folks, for your friends and family. So we need you to be carrying that message. I think internationally, there's just a long way for us to go and just gender and patriarchy. And so as we fight the patriarchy across the globe, that people doing those acts of, questioning why women and gender expansive folks are not in spaces, right? Thinking about how we are inviting and being kind to each other, because that's incredibly important. Calling us out as Americans when we need to be called out, because the international pressure also means something for us here too. Um, so there's all these ways in which everyday people can change and make change. And I will say the underlying piece of all of that is keeping hope and being hopeful, because that is also incredibly important to the work, right? People are trying to crush our souls and our spirits. And so keeping hope and practicing kindness and doing the accountability work and creating community is deeply important to how we get free.
Yeah, Norbese, and I think hope comes from action. And so it's very important that every person in this world has power. And how do we have power? Is A, that we vote, and B, we can decide every dollar leaving our wallet where we're going to put that dollar. And so I think everybody is able to align with their values, figure out what their values are, align with their values, and act accordingly. And that is possible for every single person on this earth. And so I think it's very possible to unite in that way and to create that community, global community of people who are more or less on the same page. And we don't have to agree to everything. We just have to find compromises that work for more people than just a small proportion of a population.
Yeah.
Norbese, so what does success look like for you?
Yeah. So we have our vision statement, but what I always say success looks like for us is Star Trek. And I say that because it's such a lovely representation of the where humanity can go. It's a place where people have full autonomy over their bodies, that we have figured out economic injustice, we have figured out social inequality, that you can come as you are. Um, and that is the world in which we are fighting for. Our vision statement is a world where all people, regardless of their economic, social economic status, race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, or geographic location, have complete autonomy over their reproductive health.
Mm.
This includes unrestricted access to affordable, safe abortion services, as well as comprehensive sexual and reproductive health. So that is where we are moving to. That's our contribution. Like we feel like our work is contributing to this vision. But yeah, it's Star Trek for short, our vision statement for long.
And it's an important piece of healthcare, and it's an important piece of people's rights, human rights.
Mhm.
Norbese, so what kind of a leader do you feel you are and do you want to be? How do you show up?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I've been thinking a lot about this piece, and I think um, I had been talking to my people. I'm always like, my girl chat, my friends that I lean on about like what is needed in terms of leadership, and how did that jive with who I am. And I think in terms of leaders or leadership qualities, I want to lead and I try to lead with integrity and honesty and trust and accountability. And I say this because in a world where we don't have kindness is on short, where people are lonely and people are struggling, that the consequences of inaction are very real. Um, and a place where the world is just hard enough as it is, that there needs to be um, an integrity to the work, um, which is in our mission, which I want to like, this is why we here, and that's what centers us, right, on the work. And so we don't want to forget why we are here. which is easy to do with all the like kind of celebrity of being leaders, right? That you can forget why and why you are here and your purpose. And so that is integrity. Um, that honesty is incredibly important, particularly in a world where it's just harder to find truth. So knowing and being honest with what we can and what we can't do, who I am, and with our staff is this incredibly important to me. Um, Having grit, which is what you just kind of need to push through, which is incredibly important. Um, and I call grit is hand in hand with accountability, and being able the folks to tell me when, I need to change or when I need to make mistakes, and being open to that conversation, and making the changes, and folks holding me accountable, including the community holding me accountable to do the mission work. And so that's the leader that I try to be. I try to lead with kindness, just because I just think I'm a child that grew up on Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, and I think kindness is just incredibly important. And um, and and also seeing people's humanity, both who I work with and my peers, as well as the folks that we work on behalf for.
Yeah. Nourbese, and you said something very important, I think, that humanity and how we are so much more connected than we are divided, even though we're being fed the story of division. So, in the spirit of that, I'm wondering, how do you feel can white women help Black women or support Black women? Because that's always something, that's a conversation that many people have, but I think we are still reluctant to have this conversation. And it's an important conversation because there is so much more that unites us.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of pieces. One is being in community with Black women. That doesn't mean that like folks have to like be at every rally or be at every protest, but that does mean of like being in solidarity and conversations. Um, that means like showing up and having those conversations. It is also doing the work within your community because white women often are the best messengers for other white women, just
Mm.
like Black women are messengers for other Black women. Um, that also means that we also well, I'll put it this way. I think that there's also that solidarity means compliance, and like we need trusting relationships, right? And so that also means that there's still accountability on both sides. That doesn't mean that like we don't have to say if a Black woman says something, we can't say anything, but it's to be in constant communication, and figuring out how we can both uplift each other. So that also means like, how do we think about in the rooms that we're inviting Black women in, and not in a way that is like hostile, but in a way that is building community. It is going to the organizations and being in conversation, and that we all have talents that we can lend to organizations and people and being in community with folks. And so I know like sometimes we try to overcomplicate it. It's like, well, I don't know how to start. And that start could be just really like going to community meetings. It could be reading. There's a ton of lists around books and pieces to kind of decolonize people's brains. We all have a bit of colonizing of that, right? And really thinking about ways are and then showing up.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Norpesa, so what are your plans and goals? What is happening for the rest of 2025 and 2026?
Yeah, so we are still fighting the good fight with policy pieces. So as as we're pushing forward in as much as we can in some of our state policy work, as well as our federal pieces as much as we can. We know we're not going to get anything passed, but we still making sure that we're organizing our elected officials around a progressive goal. Our work is also organizing people. And so we have some fun things. We have a book club, a romance book club that we use or that we have to like both talk about books and romance books, but also um, have a political orientation and organizing people and building community um, and building power in community. We are doing a couple, like we love to do a mixed cultural work together. And so working with different films like Red, White, and Blue, which is a film around abortion access, and showing and having film discussions about um, how abortion access and stories around abortion access can impact people's lives and they kind of shift conversation in ways that like fact sheets and like news reports can't. And we're preparing for both the elections this year and next year, and making sure that we're helping to turn out with folks of voters of color and low propensity voters, because these state elections are going to matter so much as we go into the 2026 year.
Yeah, definitely. Nourbese, so what would you like our listeners to take away from your story?
Yeah, I would say that radical change is possible, but we have to commit to it, that we are the protagonists in our stories. And that means that we have options that we can use our gifts to make the world better. And so I invite folks to think about in ways in which we can leave the world better than where we found it, and your own special story. Um, so I would say that as one, and then two, I invite folks to also come check out all. You can find us on Instagram and Blue Sky and on the websites or on the internet at allaboveall.org. And like, yeah, come have fun with us. We do some fun stuff. Join the email list.
Nourbese, thank you so much for leading by example in a powerful way in an area that is really under threat. I'm very grateful for all your work. I'm grateful for your building an intersectional space that is important, especially in the next year or two until the midterms in America. And we're going to shout out about you, and we'll do everything we can to help promote your mission.
Thank you. And thank you for capturing the stories of women across the globe. Those stories are so important, and I just really wanted to give kudos to the work that you are doing.
Thank you.